I have often been outraged to look at the difference in response between the Black Lives Matter protesters and the Trump mob inside the Capitol. It's often pointed out, and I agree, that the Trump supporters were doing much worse and were not being peaceful the way almost all the Black Lives Matter protesters were. But I'll take a risk and point out also that especially initially, within that first hour and a half or so, the officers in the Capitol were completely outgunned and overwhelmed. Particularly, they were overwhelmed. There were thousands of people, Trump supporters, there, and if there were a score of officers, I didn't see them. And a lot of those officers were running off to try and give directions to the senators and representatives and all the other innocents that were that needed to be protected and getting them out of harm's way. So the fact that they didn't crack down, how are they going to crack down? Did you want them to start a gun battle in the middle of the Capitol Rotunda, or on this in the Senate well or the House floor? I mean, just for starters, those are very historic buildings. Did you want corpses all over the place and people running for their Molotov cocktails that they had put together? And in one sense, this may well have been a big failure for Donald Trump, in that it wasn't a whole lot worse than it could have been. Think of those officers. I mean, seemed like there were one or two federal employees with automatic weapons. Say they had started spraying and shooting as fast as they could. Corpses and blood all over the Capitol buildings, and national treasures burnt and destroyed. Fires started. Who knows? There might have been bombs. That would have been far more beneficial. That confusion and shock would have been far more beneficial to Trump than what did happen. And yes, if those officers, instead of being 20 of them, there had been 250, their options would have been a whole lot greater. But they didn't. And so, furthermore, they were, as I say, they were indoors. When you're outdoors on a city street, you have a whole lot more options. You don't have to worry about burning down the building in which you are, or destroying a bunch of very historic places and statues, and so I think that's an important part. They were overwhelmed, they were outgunned, and that is the fault of President Trump. I do believe that he knew that he was going to attempt this insurrection for weeks and weeks. He knew exactly when the vote count was going to happen. He thought maybe if he threw a bunch of rioters in there, that there'd be such destruction and such mayhem that he, somehow stopped the count
and then somehow, some weird way, the Supreme Court would get involved and send it back to the states, or who knows what wild idea he had. It doesn't have to make sense, and it doesn't have to be likely. He's